Hey folks, welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Pamela Morgan about a very important topic, and that is how to leave your crypto assets, your Bitcoin, to your loved ones after you pass away. There's some very thought-provoking things and things I never even thought about that I now need to implement myself. So I really hope you enjoy the podcast. I do have to say there was a slight bit of technical difficulties. We had to drop off about 45 minutes or an hour into the podcast, and we came back in, and I did edit that. So you will notice that there's kind of a little break in the flow of the conversation. And there's also some sort of popping noise on occasion on Pamela's end. I don't know why. I didn't see it until post-production, but it's really not that big of a deal, but I do apologize for that. So anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed the podcast. Please leave us a rating review on iTunes, subscribe to us today, and feel free to contact either of us, and all the contact information will be in the show notes at the end of the show. So anyways, I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the Did You Know Crypto podcast. Today, I'm very excited to be speaking to Pamela Morgan. She's an attorney, educator, entrepreneur, and public speaker who has focused her law practice exclusively on Bitcoin and digital currencies since early 2014. Pamela, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No, it's great having you here. And before we delve into the topic of crypto asset inheritance planning, I'd love to hear your Bitcoin blockchain origin story. Like, where did you first hear about it? What kind of convinced you of its, future potential, and what really got you excited about it?
Sure. I love to share this story because I think it's common, or more common than maybe, I came across it in 2009, which is not really anyone I know. How I learned about Bitcoin specifically was I was speaking at a conference in Athens, Greece in November of 2013, I believe it is. And I was speaking at this conference called Disrupt. It was actually called Disrupt, Startup, Scale Up. And it was all about disruptive things that we can do, ways that we can change the system. And that really, really appealed to me because basically I've been dissatisfied with most systems most of my life. I think that they can, we can create systems that are much better. And I think that, when systems get kind of bloated and we start protecting systems just for protecting system's sake, then we kind of lose touch with why we actually, had the system in the first place. So I'm at this conference and I'm speaking about entrepreneurship for people with disabilities, with the idea being that often people that have disabilities have difficulty finding work. But if we can empower them and teach them how to open their own businesses and teach them, give them resources for entrepreneurship, not only can they support themselves, but often they can build really, really successful businesses and support a lot of other people. So I was speaking about that, and of course, I'm attending the conference and I'm listening to these other speakers. And to be completely honest with you, I was bored out of my mind. There were very few truly disruptive talks happening there. And I was like, this is I actually felt sad. I was like, no, this can't be the pinnacle of disruption. There was someone there who was talking about electing Hillary Clinton in 2016 in the US. And I was just like, whatever your politics are, no one can really argue about Hillary Clinton's disruptive credentials. She's pretty as status quo as they get. So,
exactly.
I was totally heartbroken. I'm like, no, this is so boring. And then a speaker got on stage and he started talking about Bitcoin. And that speaker was Andreas M. Antonopoulos, which I'm guessing that many of your listeners know. And I'm also guessing that many people kind of stumbled upon Bitcoin by finding one of his videos or attending a talk or something like that. And so that was me. I was sitting in the audience and I was listening really, really carefully to what he was saying. My background, I have a law degree and I'm licensed to practice law in 2 states in the US, but my bachelor's degree is in business administration and computer programming. And so as I'm sitting here listening to this guy eloquently talk about the potential of Bitcoin changing the world, I remember getting chills. And I remember thinking, if half of what this guy says is true, this thing could actually change the world. And I was so excited by it that I left that conference with this new toy, this new thing, right? To kind of explore. And ideally, that's what happens when you go to a conference or you go to a meetup. You're inspired and you're excited about something. And so I left that conference, and long story short, 2 months later, I quit my full-time job and decided I was going to make a career for myself in Bitcoin. And I've been working in it ever since.
That's quite a bold decision.
Well, I come from entrepreneurship. Both of my parents are entrepreneurs. It kind of runs in my family, and I couldn't help it when I saw the potential. Like, it seemed to me at the time, and honestly, it still does, that Bitcoin actually has the potential to change systems in a meaningful way. And I know I kind of talked a little bit earlier about systems, but I think, like bureaucracy and systems tend to really keep people down a lot of times, even though that's not the intent. And they become so bloated that they stop providing their actual function. And, a lot of my lawyer friends and colleagues say, well, we're going to go inside these systems and we're going to fix them from the inside. And I try not to laugh, but the reality is, systems don't work like that, right? And so for a long time, I felt pretty frustrated that I wasn't able to kind of make the change that I wanted to make in the world. And with Bitcoin, I think it actually gives all of us the opportunity to make real change, because it's such a different system, because it's a peer-to-peer system, because we don't have to ask permission from gatekeepers. That gives us the freedom to make real change and to create real systems that work for real people. Not perfect systems, right? Because that doesn't exist, but just alternative systems, things that we can experiment in ways that, big bureaucracies can't experiment.
No, and I would totally agree in terms of systems. I think that once a system gets to a certain size, they change for the worse slowly from the inside, and they usually only change from the outside, or they only usually change in any kind of meaningful way, usually in large spurts from outside actors.
Yeah.
So the argument of working from the inside, I guess, has, some people can point to some merit to it, but I think it's usually outside influences that kind of force the hand of whatever system that you're looking at to actually have to change, in a sort of adapt or die situation.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, you see this a lot with small businesses, and you see it a lot when you start with an entrepreneur who then grows their business and they get funding. And when they get funding, they tend to bring in a lot of outside people, and the culture starts to change. And then it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And often, the founder's original vision gets lost because then it becomes all about making money and market share and all of these other things. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not suggesting that, people shouldn't make money or, build good companies. But I think that, the balance when you're dealing with a small organization is there. Maybe you've got, 70-30 or 60-40 kind of balanced with values first, and then making money second. And somewhere along the line, it kind of flips. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I love this industry and why I'm so interested in dedicating my career to Bitcoin and other open public blockchains.
At Google, I think, is a good example of that. Very early on, and technically still their motto is, do no evil. It might be paraphrasing that a bit, but I think they've kind of gone a little bit beyond that and are kind of now, part of the systems, and they are beholden to shareholders. Are no longer kind of a startup, kind of bootstrapped company that's kind of out to change the world. They've already changed the world, and now they're trying to keep the world as it is that they've now changed.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting point, right? Because once you have something, you want to keep it. And I just want to jump in with one little thing. I think that you're right. I think the motto was don't be evil. And my colleague, who is now my colleague, Andreas, I think said, with Bitcoin, what we're creating is can't be evil. right? So that's the beauty of immutability. That's the beauty of this system, is that you can't change it to be beholden to shareholders, because there are no shareholders. And I think that's the fundamental difference. And I think that's also encompasses the promise of this technology.
Yeah, it's a neutral medium, right? It's however the individual, right? There's no person that can gain control of it to use the whole entire system for evil, just only what they themselves have control of.
Yes.
And I think that's a very important distinction between that and kind of how current systems are, where the whole thing can be hijacked to do evil at a large scale, where the only way that any sort of meaningful way that Bitcoin could be used to be evil is only the small part of it that small individual can gain control of.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because that's the benefit of getting rid of centralization, right? And quote unquote proof of authority. When you vest people with authority, they inevitably become corrupted at some level. And so I think it's exciting to work with a system that doesn't have that characteristic.
Yeah, no,
or at least minimizes.
Yeah,
maybe not. Maybe that's too strong of a statement. Maybe let me back up on that. Maybe it isn't a fundamental part of it right now.
I'm kind of an extremist by nature, so I'm kind of very much a kind of a crypto-utopian as far as for where I see the world heading and what this technology can offer. So I'm one of those people that somewhat at times needs to be reminded to back myself down just a little bit, and that not everything's going to be sunny skies constantly, but I really think that this gives us the greatest chance of achieving something close to what futurists have been kind of hoping for a long time.
I do too, and I think on the same level, it could also result in like the dystopian future of sci-fi, right?
Oh,
and so
absolutely. Yeah, that's the really interesting thing about this technology is it's got the potential to do both. Like Bitcoin itself can't, but the copy and paste of that technology with a few things added to it could very well be exactly what we were trying to strive not to achieve.
And that's why I think it's so important for people who, share this vision and share this idealism to do what they can to work in the industry. And I know a lot of people don't have a lot of free time, but, without those voices, like I don't want to get like too melodramatic here, but I do see this right now as this opportunity to shape the future. And I think it's important to have the voices for people who want to see a future with freedom, with financial freedom, with freedom that we don't otherwise have, not all about surveillance, not all about control, but really focused on individual empowerment and freedom.
And that's why I kind of enjoy, although a lot of people consider crypto Twitter or just Twitter in general to be kind of a cesspool, yeah. But I do really enjoy at least the crypto side of it, outside of the wind, moon, and Lambos and all that, but the actual kind of like real discussions about, governance models and things like that. And a lot of them I don't think necessarily are going to work within the blockchain crypto sphere per se, but just the exploration of governance models is maybe not working for a blockchain project, but something, maybe a way to shape society, and just the different ideas and kind of bouncing them around. I really do enjoy it. I like kind of running around because I think it's good that we are having these discussions now and Absolutely. Kind of shaping the space very early on. Because in 20 years, I think it's going to look a lot different. And a lot of the people I think that make their that put in the work now, I think are going to, and have the right kind of vision. I hope that they are able to, shape this vision in the future.
Yeah. Well, I think we all can, that's the exciting thing, is that we actually can. And, many people have been having these sorts of discussions for decades, right? But it's just now that we are at a place with technology that we can actually see that kind of last mile, right? We're kind of seeing technology develop in so many different areas, and it's kind of, in my view, it's kind of now or never, right?
Yep.
And I just want to clarify, when I say like work in the space, I don't necessarily mean like go get a job and work for a company. I mean participate, make your voice heard. Go on Twitter, go on Reddit, kind of be out there, support projects that you think are valuable, like that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that you have to quit your full-time job too, although I will tell you, it's really awesome. but yeah, it's also kind of scary.
Yeah, no, I envy you. I think a lot of people do, but it's also, quite a bit of, it's quite courageous actually to do that nowadays. Most people kind of just stick with what's safe and are quite happy with that. But I mean, yeah, I think even if you don't want to do that, something as simple as just asking your local coffee shop or, restaurant, hey, do you take crypto? And then if they're interested, just keep on asking them, right? And eventually you won't be the only one who is, and you might be that catalyst for that one person, that two people, that three people.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of that guerrilla work that needs to be done. It doesn't seem very important at the time, but if, a million of us are doing that constantly,
totally,
it really has a network effect kind of on society as a whole.
Well, and even if you're not asking them, do you take Bitcoin, but in the hopes that they will, right? Getting them to actually know someone or see someone, like put a face and a name with this thing that is kind of crazy, right? Because we kind of forget in this industry that, most people really don't have a good understanding of what this is, right? Yeah. And all they're hearing is mainstream, media being like, oh, terrorists and drug dealers, bad things, and we're like, wait a minute, I don't do any of that. And pretty much no one I know.
Well, we've added tulip bubbles.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it's all about
now we're
and like, it isn't, for a lot of us, it isn't. And so I think even just having, basic conversations with people is absolutely useful. The other thing I think that people forget about is, meetup.com. There are Bitcoin meetups all around the world, and you can go and meet, like-minded people there. And if there isn't one, you can actually start one. And I co-founded the meetup in Chicago, called Bob, which is the Bitcoin and Open Blockchain Meetup. And you might have heard of my co-founder, Bitcoin Mom. She's rad. And she and I were, yeah, so she and I were in Chicago, and there were a couple of other meetups, but they weren't actually having meetups. Like they weren't actually meeting up. And so she and I were like, well, this sucks. There's no community here. We want to nerd out. We want to talk to other people about this stuff. And, Chicago, my gosh, like there should be a community here. And so she and I just decided to start a meetup, and we contacted the other organizers and said, hey, listen, you're welcome to come. You're welcome to do what you want to do. And, we'll cross promote your events, but we're going to have this meetup, and we're actually going to meet. And we're going to meet twice a month. Once we're going to do a social, the other one, we're going to do a workshop. And so at the workshop, people can come and actually learn something about the technology. And it's now one of the biggest meetups in the United States for sure. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 2,800 people.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yeah, I know. It's really great. I don't run it anymore because I'm now location independent. But, the Hannah and Mark and Ian and Ben have taken over, and they've been doing a great job building the community and sustaining the community. And the reason that I'm talking about this is because we really went from almost no one. And when we had our first meetup, I think there were 12 people there, maybe 14 tops. And like, some significant others and kids were in attendance. Okay. So it wasn't like we had, 20 crypto enthusiasts there, but, it's just a matter of having events and letting people know that you're interested in this thing and kind of building community. And it can just happen as easy as that. So for anyone who doesn't have a community, like I'm trying to encourage you to explore that.
No, and I think one of the really great things, although a little bit with the schisms and stuff like that, it's gotten a little bit different. But especially, I remember back in 2013, 2014, especially, it's a really warm and open community. If you come in and say, "Hey, I'm interested in this," it's not a bunch of people going, "Well, sorry, you missed the boat," right, or anything like that. It's
right.
It's people are very excited to talk about it. I was just listening to I'm a little bit behind on Laura Shin's podcast, but she was talking to Melton Demers and Joe Carlson, and they were talking about how different it is in this industry from other ones, where in other industries, after work, you go and you have drinks and you talk about sports, you talk about whatever. But I can't remember if it was Jill or Milton, but they were saying, when we go meet up after work for drinks, all we talk about is crypto for the rest of the night still.
Right. I mean, yeah, it can absolutely be all encompassing for sure.
But actually, we should probably start talking about crypto asset inheritance. And so I was, doing research prior to that, and I was looking up some stuff just on, regular asset planning and wills. And I was reading that it was about 60% of Americans, not crypto people, but just average Americans, lack a will or any kind of planning at all. And I'm willing to guess that number is probably much, much higher for crypto owners, given our age probably skews much younger.
Absolutely.
So I was just wondering if we could just talk about basic wills, estate planning first, and then kind of roll into where crypto assets kind of have a unique little niche there.
Sure, I'd love to. So I think you're spot on. Our industry does skew younger and more tech driven, and that tends to be kind of people who aren't that interested in writing a will. But there are a lot of people who are now getting into it who do have wills, but haven't incorporated those assets into those wills. So we can talk a little bit about that. Part of what I do, let me back up for one quick second and just explain to you how I got into this, because I didn't actually start out wanting to do estate planning. It kind of happened. So when I started working in this industry, I was helping startups who were getting funding in cryptocurrency. So they would get a bunch of Bitcoin, and then multi-sig was really not easy to use. There weren't any nice wallets. This is before Copay. This is before BitGo. This is before all of them. And, the user interface was really not there, and you had to do a lot in order to implement multi-sig. But I didn't understand why these companies who were getting, funding in hundreds of Bitcoin weren't doing that. And one of the reasons they weren't is because it wasn't important enough to them in comparison to like what their vision was for their company. So I started helping companies implement governance processes, right? And part of those involved doing process controls using the Bitcoin technology, right? So putting money in multi-sig. And then to supplement that, let's say you have three principals. You have your CEO, your CTO, and your CMO. Which is Chief Executive Officer, Chief Technology Officer, and Chief Marketing Officer. So you have three people, and you create a 2 of 3 multi-sig. What happens? So all three of these people have keys, and you only need 2 of them in order to move money. No one person can move money on their own. So what happens if your CTO gets a sweet offer from another company and decides to leave? What do? Right? You have money locked into this multi-sig, and now you have a key situation. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with it if your CTO doesn't leave, but the building where they're storing their keys, something happens, there's a flood, and they lost their keys and they lost their backups. So how do we create plans to ensure that you'll actually be able to access your assets from a company perspective? And then how do we create plans for disaster recovery so that we're not dealing with catastrophic loss? So this, you might see how that kind of lends itself to inheritance planning, because what would happen is I would start this conversation with the founders. And then after we would create this plan, I would say, well, hey, by the way, how much of your net worth is in Bitcoin? And they would look at me like I had 5 heads, and they would be like, all of it. And I'm like, okay, well, do you have family that you want to actually inherit this? And they would be like, oh my gosh. And yeah, so then, and they would say, I never thought of that. And I would say, okay, well, especially if you've got children, or if you have a non-traditional family, meaning if you haven't married the person that is your partner, legally married them, they won't be able to inherit any of your assets. Assuming they even could access your crypto assets, they wouldn't actually be able to inherit them. So let's start talking about, how we can make this happen. And that's how I got into this. It was purely organic. It wasn't intentional. And then as I started talking to more and more people, I realized that this is a big deal in our industry. People are getting into crypto and they're having a really great time. And all of a sudden, we have a price run up, and something that was play money, right, is all of a sudden now 20, 30, 40, 50% of your net worth. And now you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't play money anymore. Like this could really change my family's life. And I want to make sure that they can access it. So that's how this happened.
Okay. And so I guess that's kind of probably for most of us. I mean, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, but I myself had kind of recently been thinking about that, and I'd started to put together some folders with just kind of the forms for like the insurance and all these different kinds of any kind of asset that I have, for the investments and crypto. But when I came to crypto, I was like, okay, I'm going to put down like the addresses it's at, but I was like, I don't want to put a Word document and end up like some people that we've heard about in the Twitter sphere that kept their private keys on an open source or an open document and lose all that stuff. So the question is like, what do I do? Do I put it in a safety deposit box? Do I break it up into multiple pieces and give it to multiple people? I mean, what is really the best way to kind of go about kind of just putting all of our affairs in order and getting these kind of crypto assets? Do you have like any specific recommendations for that, or just kind of like general ideas?
Absolutely. To answer that question, I wrote a 137 page book. And I don't mean to give you the lawyer answer, but the reality is there is no one plan that works for everyone because everyone's family is different. Everyone's situation is different. Let me give you an example. Some people that have, Bitcoin or other crypto assets live in the US. They live in an affluent neighborhood where there isn't, a lot of crime. There isn't a lot of break-ins. They have a safe home. They have a bank up the street that has a safety deposit box. They have no reason to think that, anyone is going to try to seize their assets. So for them, and they have a traditional family, they have, a spouse and a couple of kids, and they're all biologically related. The kids are related to the spouse. And, it's a very kind of vanilla Leave It to Beaver sort of situation, which is great for them. They will require a bit less planning than someone who, for example, lives in a dangerous area, lives in an area where there aren't banks that have safe deposit boxes, or they live in an area where they do need to worry about government seizure for no good reason without due process, or there's corruption. A lot of times we forget that these assets are global in nature. And so to say that there is one estate plan that works throughout the entire world is naive at best, dangerous at worst, because it causes people to make decisions that maybe aren't actually safe for them. So what I do in the book is we start out with a get it done plan. And it's basically where you can sit down for 1 to 2 hours. So all you need to do is block out 1 to 2 hours, sit down with a book, and I take you through step by step of creating your initial estate plan for your crypto assets. We talk about location. We talk about what you should put where. We talk about how you shouldn't ever write your seed words or your keys in your will. That is a terrible idea. And the reason is, in most jurisdictions, your will becomes a public record. And so what happens is that document is submitted with the court and becomes part of the public record, meaning that anyone can search that document. Now you've got a race. And the race is your family who's grieving, who doesn't know anything about crypto, who doesn't know how to transfer, your Bitcoin, doesn't even know that they're entitled to Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin Gold or whatever else you decided to, whatever fork you decided to take or not take. Now you're dealing with a race between your family's understanding of crypto assets and what this actually means, and someone who's scanning public records for cryptocurrency keys.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. I imagine that is going to be coming up here probably. Some sort of, for someone who's kind of scammy in nature to be doing is going through and just scanning public records to see if anything that shows up with the word private key shows up in a doc search.
Yeah, or seed or 24 words,
Yeah.
or, I mean, there are so many ways to do this. You can create a pretty easy database of words, Trezor, Ledger, right? I mean, you can take kind of all the companies, Coinbase, all the companies that, have wallets, and kind of look through and quickly look for those keywords. It's not something that you would even need a human to do per se, right?
And
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were saying?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I didn't, I know that the stuff in the book, we don't want to like throw it all out on just the podcast, right? So, but I did want to touch on, with smart contracts. I know you cover this in the book, but it just kind of, how do you see that kind of applying to the inheritance in the future? Is that going to be something that we can almost, in a way, almost automate wills and all these types of, basically the asset distribution after you pass?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's a really, really common question. So first, let me touch on the first thing you said, which is we don't want to give it all away. Actually, I've given a lot of the book away because I believe in open source, and so I'm one of the few lawyers who actually licenses most of my work under a Creative Commons open source license. So you can see the beginning sections of the book and the Get It Done plan. I've published a lot of that on Medium and on my website for people to kind of get their head around it. And then if you like that, and if my writing style works for you, and if you feel like you're making progress, then go and get the book and continue the process. Because what the book does is it starts with the Get It Done plan, and then it takes you through a really in-depth SURE analysis, SURE, which is security, usability, resilience, and efficiency. And we start to analyze every decision that you're making with that framework. And I kind of help you make your plan better and make your storage better and make all of the things that you're doing both more secure, but also more usable by the people who will inherit your assets, and make sure that we have resiliency and efficiency as well. So, I'm probably the only person who's like, don't buy my book. First, go and look at the free stuff. But, that's my nature. I want people to actually get value out of it. And what I really, really want is for people who buy the book and look at the materials to do something. Like, if you don't do something, your loved ones will not be able to inherit these assets. So I don't want my book to be the barrier, between you paying for my book and your family not inheriting your assets. I don't really think that's a good way to go. So that's why I've made a lot of this stuff available for free. So.
No, yeah, and I was going to just say that I'm kind of one of those people that also, I don't know if you want to call it the law of attraction or whatever it is, but just from looking at people that I respect and, do everything from podcasts to writing to whatever, I see that a lot of these folks, what they do is they put out everything for free.
Yeah.
And it's available if you want to take the time to do it, but they also offer a product. If you don't want to spend, 15 hours searching through, this podcast or that Medium article or this thing on the site, if you just want a nice, concise thing, then, people are willing to do that. And also they're willing to do it as well, just as a thanks for all the information you already have given them.
Yeah.
Some of them already have that information already, but they're just like, hey, thanks.
Yeah.
And I do think that it's kind of like a new, a new way that's kind of just been developing over the last 10 years, along with the gig economy and just kind of like a new economic model in a way, I guess, for content creators, which I really kind of enjoy a lot more than the old, subscription, buy my book to find out my secrets.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and a lot of times, you buy the book and you're like, wait, this doesn't it doesn't work for me, right? For whatever reason, this person's voice is, annoying, meaning the way that, the writing style doesn't work for you, or, it just doesn't gel. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of making sure that people, get value. I really, really care about people getting value, and I really, really care about people's families being able to inherit these crypto assets. Because I kind of feel like everyone in this industry, like if you have any Bitcoin or Ether or any other cryptocurrency, like at some point in your life, a family member or a friend has been like, what are you doing? Like, that's ridiculous. Right. And so like, they've kind of been judgy on you. And I feel like, you're a risk taker. Like, you're in this at the beginning. And I think we're still, in the beginning Although I guess some people would disagree. So yeah, I think it's important that your family is actually able to see that you're right. I don't know. Is able to take advantage of your foresight.
So I was actually I want to talk about the smart contracts thing again, but this just something popped in my head, and the fact that you left your job, and I imagine that I'm going to be talking to another guest tomorrow about something a different field, but kind of a similar thing, in that they kind of took, very early on, they got into Bitcoin and they got into crypto. Before, I mean, even in 2013, we think that was such a long time ago, but it was such a small community then. And it really didn't even have any kind of, like, other than a few Time articles, any kind of public knowledge about it, other than the run up to 1,000. And it's kind of a big, reputational risk to go in on something that majority of people in the majority of professions basically kind of looked at as at best just a bunch of internet nerd money, and at worst, something that only people who buy drugs off the internet and are kind of, iffy in nature are going to participate in. So did you experience anything like that from people in the, in the legal profession, your peers kind of going like, what are you doing? Why are you getting involved in this?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, I definitely heard a lot of that, and like, wait, what? You're doing what? Why are you doing that? But I think I had an advantage in that I really, really looked at the technology and how the technology works. Like, what is it that makes Bitcoin immutable? What is it that makes this ledger unchangeable? How does this thing actually work at its core? And I'm certainly not a developer, and I'm not, a core developer, but I thought it was really, really important to understand the technology and what its limitations are and how it works before I kind of made that leap. So when I made the leap, I was confident. I was like, you guys don't see this, and it's a giant experiment, and it might fail, but it also might succeed. And this is the vehicle to the future that I want to live in. And so I'm going to be part of it. I don't know how I'm going to be part of it. I don't know what kind of part I'm going to play, but if there's anything that I should be spending my time and effort on, in my opinion, it's this. And so that's what I would tell them. And so, of course, they knew me. So they kind of had, cognitive dissonance, because they're hearing like Bitcoin, Silk Road, and, it's only used for, killing people and all these bad things. And of course, none of that was true anyway, but
yep, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But this is what they're hearing. And then they look at me and they know me. And they're like, wait a minute, but you're not this. And so what am I missing? And it actually gave me an opportunity to talk to people and in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to talk. So, none of them joined me in my quit your job and come and work in this industry. However, like many of us, 2017 brought a lot of calls and a lot of emails and a lot of texts and a lot of messages, and like, hey, so you're smart, you got into Bitcoin early, and the reality for me is that I quit my full-time job. And for anyone who started a business, that basically the first couple of years, you're not making money. So the Bitcoin that I made, I sold to pay bills, and I don't begrudge that at all. I took a chance and I did what I needed to do. I'm not a Bitcoin millionaire, but I'm a happier, meaning that, I do work that I love. I work with people that I love. I feel like I'm doing something meaningful. And I think that that's all anyone could really ask for. I have enough money to pay my bills and do what I need to do. And I've created a life that makes me really happy. And I think that that's the beauty of this technology, that it allowed me to do that. And many other people who I know, that work in this industry have been able to do that as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting in that I kind of have been able to do a lot of side gig stuff. Like, I'm not a programmer. I'm learning. I'm teaching myself how to do that, but I'm at probably a toddler level of understanding the language.
Yeah.
And mostly I was doing that was just so I could actually understand the nuts and bolts of the tech, right? And kind of get when developers have opinions on this or that, where they're coming from. But anyways, I mean, there's a lot of work for people that teach themselves coding, and it's one of the things I'm gonna try to push on my children is to learn how to do that. But even outside of that, if you can put together a few words and you can write halfway decently, I was finding side work, looking around, different blockchain startups and coin projects, and whether or not you agree with that project's vision or longevity. A lot of them are offering, bounty campaigns, write documentation for us or create these infographics or something like that.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of like little gig work all over the place. It's not enough for me to quit my full-time job on as of yet, but it's definitely a good supplemental income to pay down, mortgage and things like that. And I really enjoy this space. And that's just so I don't want to call it Wild West because that has bad connotations generally. But I don't know what a better way to put it is that, there's just stuff out there. And if you just want to go out and grab it, you can.
Yeah.
That's what I really enjoy about this space so far.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There are lots of opportunities here, and you can actually, make your own opportunities, which is effectively what I've done.
Exactly.
By focusing on inheritance planning, mostly because no one else was doing it. Everyone else wants to do some smart contract. Amazing. We'll get back into the question that you asked me earlier about smart contracts, and a lot of people are really excited about the potential of the technology, and I am too. And they want to kind of work on futuristic stuff, and that's great. But right now, we need something that's going to help us today, and none of those projects are viable. And I know that's a big statement, but I stand by it. I think that none of those projects are viable to help most families in a meaningful way. So earlier you asked me.
Yeah, definitely. In the now.
Yeah.
A lot can happen in 1, 3, 5, 10 years, whenever it's going to take to actually kind of really get all the bugs out. And this is not something that you want to leave up to. This is probably good enough sort of code.
Yeah, that's so you hit on one really, really good point, which is, when we're doing a simple transaction, it's short in time, right? So if the software doesn't act as expected, we know kind of right away, and hopefully we can try to fix it. With estate planning, often in traditional estate planning, you often write a will, and then your client won't revisit their estate planning for decades. And so you get this will that is effectively atrophied, meaning they'll say, oh, I leave my, Tahoe to my cousin. And like, they haven't had a Tahoe in 10 years. They'll say things like, I leave my house located at this place, which you can't actually leave a house in this way, but, I'll leave my house located in this place to these 3 people, and one of them will have already passed away. So this is really, really common in, traditional estate planning. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. The least likely thing to go wrong is asset distribution, meaning once we know who should get the assets, that's the easiest part. The difficulty is in families, often there's an argument as to who should get the assets. And so I hear a lot of people talk about smart contracts, being able to just distribute those assets to your 3 best friends, and that's it. And nobody can do anything about it, right? This is the utopia that we hear about. Yep.
Yeah.
So how does that actually play out? Let's talk this through. So how that actually plays out is you leave all of your crypto assets to your 3 best friends, but the law doesn't recognize your 3 best friends as heirs of yours. Nope. So who are your heirs according to the law? Well, they're probably your parents or your siblings or someone else who is blood related to you. If you don't have any blood relations, you're the last person. Ultimately, in most states in the United States, those assets will then escheat to the state. We use the word escheat to mean the state will actually have legal ownership of them. Okay? So you're like, that's okay. It doesn't matter, because if the state has legal ownership of my property, but I actually gave my crypto to my 3 best friends, they'll never know, right? So this is what I hear often. The reality is that the state has an interest in getting the value. So even though they might not be able to get the Bitcoin from your friends, what they could do, if they could prove that this transfer actually happened, which, if you're using Coinbase or another KYC, AML, identity exchange, they do have records on, what you have and distributions, et cetera, et cetera. So basically what would happen is, while the state couldn't get your Bitcoin, what they would do is sue your 3 best friends for the value. So they would put a lien on their home. They would try and get them to sell their car, So basically, even though it is true that the state or your heirs, the rightful heirs, couldn't actually force someone to transfer the Bitcoin to them, they could, for all of the assets that are in the quote unquote, real world, all the tangible assets they own, they could create effectively a lawsuit against your friends and get the value. And maybe they don't get the whole value, but maybe it's super annoying and it lasts a couple of years or decades even for your friends. And you end up creating this big problem that you could actually fix with a simple will. If you say in your will, I want, these people to get these assets, in most jurisdictions, not all, but in most jurisdictions, the court will honor what you say in the will. So you could actually prevent lawsuits. You could prevent problems by simply having a will.
And who's to say that if you had some sort of smart contract sort of deal, that those addresses that your best friends, who knows how good that they are, that they even provided you the good Bitcoin address that they even have access to anymore, or that they might have lost their own private key, and then now you've just sent them, say it's accrued to a point where your $100 in investments now worth $1 million, and now it goes to a private or an address. That guy lost his private key because he's a numbskull, and now you've basically opened him up to litigation probably, and with an open public blockchain, if it doesn't necessarily attach a name to it, but if a little bit of digging, and it's not that hard to do unless people are extremely careful, that there's probably a good chance that somehow they can be linked back at some point to that address. And I completely agree. I think that the governance models are just not, we haven't figured out how to do something as complex as this through a smart contract per se. And it's probably best left to the meat space more than the digital space.
Well, you brought up such a good point, which is one of the reasons that I focus on the things that I do in this industry is because I believe that the key, pun intended, I suppose, to the future that we want to build involves education and having people understand and know how to manage their own private keys. And so you brought up such an important point. Many of the smart contracts require you, right? If you're going to transfer assets, you have to transfer them to an address. And presumably the person has to have the key behind the address. The problem is that most of my heirs, and probably most of your heirs, don't understand how to protect those private keys, and they don't understand how to use them. And so in a lot of these platforms, we're actually trusting the platform itself to generate the key and then to provide that private key in some way to the heir, which let's just talk about spam filters for 1 second. So, some of these platforms say, well, you don't have to tell your heirs that they're going to get the cryptocurrency. We're just going to notify them after, the X amount of time has happened and our dead man switch triggers, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's great. So you're relying on my mother's spam filter to not like, it's absurd when you actually look at how it works in the real world. Like from From an ideal perspective, yes, this is awesome. We absolutely want these sorts of things and we absolutely want these sorts of solutions. So I don't want people to think that, I'm not an advocate of using smart contracts. I absolutely am. But from a practical perspective, when you look at your heirs and you look at the people who will be inheriting your assets, most of them are not savvy enough to do it. And we have to rely on so many other technologies like email, like SMS, et cetera, that it's not safe to do that, in my opinion. That said, there are a lot of people who are super excited about testing this out. And I say, go for it. We need guinea pigs, but it's not going to be my family and it's not going to be, people that I care about, and it's not going to be my clients, because I don't think that the technology is there yet to actually handle real estate distribution in a way that doesn't put the company, the smart contract developer in the middle and make them the third party that we have to rely on, or B, can do it in a way that will actually be effective in most situations.
Yeah, definitely. I still get, even though, I understand the technology, I know that it's good. Even when I send any kind of transaction when it gets into larger sizes, I'm still double, triple, quadruple checking,
and you get butterflies,
that
right?
address is correct. Yeah, a little bit, and you push it, and then you're checking the transaction ID, and then you're checking the block explorer.
Yes.
And then you're calling that other person. Go, did you get it? Okay,
Yep.
Good. Even though everything is going to work, there's no reason that it shouldn't. It's still so new, and that's very straightforward. That's a very if then sort of statement.
Yeah.
With smart contracts, you're just hoping that developer did not put, a parentheses or a space or something wrong where you end up getting 1,000 Bitcoins or whatever it might be locked up in this contract for forever.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? It's the forever part, and that's the danger. I mean, that's the double-edged sword in this industry is like, yeah.
Yeah. There's nobody to unlock it.
Right. Right.
Nobody's going to come.
So it's really, really important. Yeah. No, I mean, so it's really, really important that you can, even then, I don't think that would happen again, but,
no, I don't think so either. It's just more of a little.
No, but I mean, but that's the truth when you're looking at, private blockchains. It's absolutely the truth when you're looking at, DLTs and that sort of stuff. But the real issue is, for me, when your family is grieving, how can we help them access these assets with the least amount of headaches, with the least amount of hassle, that will allow them to access them as smoothly and easily as possible, and hopefully prevent them from getting the assets stolen. So how can we do this securely?
Yeah. And there's, I think, the best example of making sure that you have a plan in place was, I don't know what the value is now, but was it Matthew Millen?
Yeah.
He was that gentleman who had, at the time of his death, I think $500 million worth of XRP. It's probably a little bit less now, but I mean, that's still a significant chunk of change.
Absolutely.
That now, and I haven't kept up with the story, so I don't know if they eventually ever found anything, but it seemed like, at least with the lawyers and the family, they were saying that nobody knew what the private key was to his wallet. Like, nobody has any idea what this is. I didn't. Was there any kind of happy ending to the story?
Not that I'm aware of.
The sad one that I'd read.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
There might have been, but last I heard, they were still trying to figure out. So this is one of the nuances of this area, right? So in theory, your private key can live, maybe on your laptop, maybe on your hardware wallet device. Maybe if you're using a hardware wallet, you've backed up your seed and you have that seed stored somewhere. Maybe you have some currency on your phone. So, a lot of it is about identifying where those keys might live, because another risk is that your family wipes all of your devices and then they don't actually have access. Or, for some people, I personally do not want my family going through all of my stuff. Right. One of the reasons is because I have client information. And so, that would be a breach of my confidentiality with my clients. So I can't have my family going through, my laptop and all of that. So, I have to have a disaster recovery plan for my client stuff too, that says, okay, these people can access it, but those people can't. And so I do basically the same thing, with my crypto assets. Is you want to make sure, you might not want to give your family your entire browsing history. Maybe you do. Maybe you want them to have all of your email, and that's totally fine. But if you don't, you need to make plans and kind of think about your digital assets a bit more holistically. But yeah, the issue is if your family could ultimately lose, thousands, millions, the
Yeah, because we don't know what is the end going to be. Whether if you pass away in 5 years or in 30 years, I mean, we don't know where the price is going to go. I don't think too many people were thinking back when Bitcoin broke $1 was $5 a piece that it was going to get up to $20,000 at any time. And some people did, but I mean, we don't know what it's going to be in 20 years. And I put a few $100 or I put $3,000-$4,000 in mid 2017. I just kind of have it sitting there. You don't know what that's going to be in 20, 30 years. It may no longer be, not that $2,000 to $3,000 is peanuts, but
it might be life-changing money, right? And depending on where you live, it is life-changing money.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, a lot of people think like, oh, I don't have enough, crypto assets to actually do any planning. Like it's really not that much. And then all of a sudden it does become, quote unquote, that much. And it really, it really could make a difference in people's lives. One other thing that we haven't touched on is, this idea of once your family does inherit or, get access to your crypto assets, like what do they do with them? So, in the US, your family members are going to have to probably open, or what they'll probably elect to do is open an exchange account, put all of your cryptocurrencies there. If you have, less known coins, or maybe your exchange, maybe you have some crazy coin that isn't actively traded, you'll shift it to a different coin and liquidate. So that involves taxation, and it involves them doing KYC and AML. And some people have family members who can't do that for whatever reason, right? And so these are kind of the nuances of thinking this through and talking about, with clients, like, okay, well, what is your family situation? How does this actually play out? And you need someone who can help walk them through that. So that's one of the quick and easy things that you can do today, is kind of identify who do you trust to help your family? Not who do you trust and I'm going to give them my keys, but who do you trust that can help walk your family through the process of, okay, here are the keys. Now, what do we do? How do we deal with this? What are your choices? Do you want to try to get every single fork out there? What is the cost associated with doing that? What is the time associated with doing that? Do you want to try to learn how to hold crypto assets? And surprisingly, I was surprised by this. For the people that I've talked to that have had this actually happen, many of the heirs actually choose to hold some of the cryptocurrency. They're not actually liquidating at all. They're trying to learn. And I think it's out of...
Oh, that is very interesting.
Right? I think it's out of like sentiment. I think it's out of respect for the person, and like they know that these people were really into it, and so they want to keep a small portion. So many of them are liquidating roughly about half, paying off bills, doing whatever, and then they're trying to keep the other half. And so then we have an issue of teaching them how to actually hold these assets securely, right? Why they shouldn't be holding it on an exchange, and teaching them all the ins and outs of the risks. And that takes time. And most people aren't actually ready to have that conversation while they're still grieving, right? It takes a period of time for them to want to have these sorts of conversations. And so I think it's important that the plan that you create takes that into account.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, because I'd put, basically almost like a how-to guide for, some of the other stuff that I had with the forms for like pulling out like the IRAs or the 401ks, and here's the form you fill out, send this, just sign here, and it's pretty much done. Or and in some of my crypto stuff, I kind of had this is how you access this device, and this is how you access this other device, and these sorts of things. But then I hadn't thought about that point of, okay, now they have access to the device, great. There's still whether it's a trace or a ledger or a keep key or whatever it might be, now they've just got this weird little thing with a little screen that says some number on it of some sort of crypto. So what do I even do with this thing? And I'm wondering if some sort of, if you're comfortable doing videos yourself of these things, or I guess, that's maybe even a business that someone, if, for some entrepreneur out there to create some sort of, walking people through how to access these in some way where their private keys aren't exposed to this third party, but to walk people through how to access these funds.
There are quite a few people who are doing this not because they want to, but because they've had a friend or a colleague who's passed, and they know that the people that are left behind don't have a clue about anything, right? And so they've kind of reluctantly become the helper. They've reluctantly become the person who helps the family and walks them through. And that's beautiful. The alternative is your family has this little device, and no matter what the instructions are that you've written, they probably can't follow them. Recently, are you a fan of Jameson Lopp by any chance? Do you follow him on Twitter?
Yeah, no, yep, I follow him on Twitter. I've listened to quite a few of his interviews. I've always been really impressed by him.
So he posted this great article. I can't remember what it was about, but I'm sure it had something to do with security, and it's specifically, I think, also inheritance planning, estate planning. But at the end, he posted this amazing video to illustrate the point that that your family probably won't be able to follow your instructions. And there's this great video of this dad who's got 2 kids, and he's like, okay, kids, write me instructions on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so they try to write instructions on how to make the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And it starts out, take 2 pieces of bread. So he takes 2 pieces of bread, spread peanut butter on bread. And so he doesn't open it, doesn't actually take the peanut butter out of the jar. He just takes the jar and just smashes the bread with it, right? And the kids are like, no, that's not what I mean, right? But it really, really illustrates the point that we assume that people understand what we're talking about. And we have all of this knowledge. You have all of this knowledge of crypto assets and how they work, knowledge that you don't even know that you know. And so when you start to write down instructions, it becomes very, very difficult to actually write down instructions that people can follow. So one of the things that some of my clients have done, I encourage people to write kind of a letter to loved ones, teaching them the basics of what do they need to know, what are the currencies that you have, not giving them keys or seeds at this point, but just kind of walking them through and talking about where will they find things, stuff like that. So what some of my clients have chosen to do is do almost like a role play where they give their loved one, typically they only do this with their spouse. So give your spouse your instructions and pretend like you're not there, and let them attempt to follow your instructions step by step and find out where that gap is, where the knowledge gap is. Also,
that's great. Yep.
Doing this is super empowering for your spouse, because many times, your loved ones, they're intimidated by this technology. And even if you don't think you're an expert, compared to them, you are. And so if you let them walk through it, then they feel like, okay, I can do this. And I love it when people have relationships that they can actually, do this. And again, it's not for everyone, right? I mean, not to be the typical lawyer, but more than 50% of marriages end in divorce. So, if you do this, you could also be giving your spouse all your private keys, et cetera, et cetera. So you really have to be honest with yourself about your relationship, and hopefully, you'll be on the good side. But yeah.
Yeah, I've tried to walk my wife through some of it, and I think that's a great point, and that is something that I will be doing here pretty soon, because I was just
Great.
thinking that a lot of times when I think this is very common for people in the space, that we kind of really do take for granted, and I especially notice it when I am trying to explain not so much the basics, but kind of a little bit more of, a little bit more kind of not advanced topics either, but kind of, kind of going beyond the beginner level and trying to get people to understand, where you kind of go like, why don't you get this? This is just, this makes perfect sense. But, they're just kind of like, not wait. So I put in this long string of numbers, and then I put, this kind of stuff. And then I put in some sort of password. Like, is that the same thing? And
Right.
you kind of realize that, okay, wait, no, this is, a little bit more. And you kind of forget that journey that you went on, that took you, months and years to get to where you are now in understanding. And I think that's where we have a lot of work to do, is to kind of really not dumb it down, but come up with, and that's for more of the programmers and the people developing the tech, but come up with ways where we keep the privacy, we keep the immutability, we keep the security that the blockchain and Bitcoin offers, but we also make it a lot easier. But until then,
Yeah,
we kind of need to work with what we have,
exactly.
which is we have to do these step by step. That's such a great idea, because I don't think I have anything in there on how to access a hardware wallet as of yet.
Right. Well, and again, I think another, to just reiterate, it's empowering for them. It gives them the opportunity to actually interact with this. You don't want your spouse to touch your hardware wallet for the first time when they're grieving. Like, that is a terrible idea. Yep. Because the likelihood is they're not going to be able to do it. And then what do they do when they can't do it? First of all, they put it down. Yeah.
Yep.
Then they go somewhere and try to find someone to help them. And if you haven't told them who they should go to, they might go to Reddit.
Yep.
They might go to the new investment meetup, right? And who are they going to find there? Maybe they'll get lucky. Maybe they'll find someone who's awesome. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll find someone who's a predator, right? Who is ready to take advantage of them. So I don't like to leave that to chance. I prefer.
No, yeah. I would not want to leave, my wife, her looking for someone to do this, to be, in the YouTube comments of some video that was posted 3 years ago.
I mean, that's exactly it. But, we, those of us that are in the industry, we forget, because we know so many people that are in it, or we know, like, does your family really even know that, Reddit exists? And, are they going to, which Reddit forum are they going to? Does that matter? Who will they find to help them? They're just, you don't want to kind of mess your family up with the politics and all the other things that go on, because they don't care about that, right? That they don't care about any of that. They care about.
Or even just something as simple as, let's just say you have Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Bitcoin Cash on there, and they end up sending Bitcoin Cash to a Bitcoin address, or Bitcoin to an Ethereum address on a separate wallet, that you go, send it to my Coinbase, and then you can cash it out if you need to. And they send it to the exact wrong wallet. Now now your estate that you left to your family is
and
gone.
For no reason.
And with
for
one
no
click
reason.
of a button.
Like, it doesn't have to be that way, right? Yeah. So I'm a big fan of, identifying people who can help, who ideally you'll identify people who personally, who are, good people who share your values, who you trust, and identify them to kind of help your family walk through it. And again, you don't have to pay someone to do that. This isn't about hiring a lawyer. This is about practical day-to-day stuff that will actually make a difference in whether or not your family can access your crypto assets.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to leave on. Was there anything else that you wanted to kind of get across to the listeners, as far as for estate planning, or anything else that they should be thinking of?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, you don't have to sit down and write a will and do all of these other things. It's a great thing to do. But if you don't have that, you don't have to do it today. But what you do have to do sooner rather than later, ideally today when you're listening to this, go to Medium, go to my website, download some of the forms, and start doing a crypto asset inventory. Give your family some information. If your family doesn't know that you have even a Gemini account or a Coinbase account, if they don't know, or a Kraken account, if they don't know that you have that, they won't know to look for your assets there. So even if you are, quote unquote, trusting a third party with your assets, if they don't know who to ask, they won't go and ask. And eventually those assets will just, sit there forever. There are simple things you can do, like a crypto asset inventory, that won't take you long at all. And it's not going to be perfect, and you're not going to have every single thing that you need, but you're going to give your family a bit of a roadmap. And something is better than nothing when it comes to this. Something is better than nothing. The other thing I'd like to say is that I not only am interested in inheritance planning, but I'm also interested in education and educating people about private keys and how this technology actually works. And so I offer legal workshops. I train lawyers and paralegals and law students about this technology. And I often work with estate planning lawyers all around the world, actually, and help them kind of bridge the gap between the technology and the legal plan. If you have crypto assets, you need both a tech or access plan, like answering the question, how will my family actually access these assets? And then ideally, you'll also have a legal plan that will say, how do you want these assets distributed? And you don't have to have the legal plan in order to start with a tech plan. So I really encourage you to just start with a tech plan today. If you know a lawyer who needs to know about this, which I get contacted a lot by people saying, hey, you know what, I've got this lawyer and they're doing this other work for me, but they don't know anything about Bitcoin, or they don't know anything about Ether. They don't know anything about any of these assets. Can you work with them? And the answer is yes. And so if you know lawyers who need this education, I'm having a legal workshop in Chicago on October 26th. And it's targeted just for lawyers. They can get continuing legal education credit by attending, and you can meet other lawyers and law students and learn the reality about this technology. I don't teach the law because lawyers know how to find the law. In the workshop, I teach about immutability, and we talk about how Bitcoin addresses never die. You can't close it like a bank account. We talk about the DAO and the Ethereum fork that split Ethereum and Classic, and how that happened and why it happened, and all of that sort of stuff, and what the real result was for people who are holding these crypto assets or cryptocurrencies. So if you know someone who wants to needs that education, feel free to have them sign up. I'm also doing a couple of other events in Chicago, August 29th. I'm doing a free event for real estate professionals. And this is actually sponsored by a title company, which I think is bold. Have you done anything about real estate yet? Have you looked at that use case?
Just a few articles in passing, and just kind of thought experiments with myself on how that would all pan out. I think it's one of the real cool ideas about how blockchain and titles can work.
Yeah. So, it's one of the applications that most lawyers see really easily as quote, low hanging fruit, because, your title search effectively, all it is going through a ledger. You're looking at a ledger that records who was the buyer and who was the seller. And they call them the grantor-grantee index. And in most places in the US, they're still musty, giant books. And, if you want fun on a weekday afternoon, go down to your recorder of deeds and tell them you want to take a look at the grantor-grantee index. Okay, maybe don't do that. But you can look at these books and trace the provenance of real estate. And effectively, what title insurance does for the most part is ensure that there aren't any gaps, that you are actually buying from the person who legally owns the property. And the blockchain, quote unquote, the blockchain, is effectively a ledger. And so if we have an immutable ledger that we can all trust, and it's public, then we don't need a title company to go through and insure against risk, because there is no risk, because we can see who owns at any given time. So most people care about this because if you bought a house, you probably paid somewhere between $400 and $1,000 for title insurance. And people are really excited about not paying that. So I'm going to be giving
Are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened. It just dropped you.
Yeah, it was like, I don't want to hear about this boring stuff.
No. I was sitting there, and then all of a sudden your name just disappeared, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, I didn't notice it. So where were we?
We dropped off. You were saying we were talking about immutability of the ledger for property, real estate, and then you were right as you were saying you don't need a title company.
Well, so one of the things that people are most excited about with this technology is not having to pay the anywhere from $400 to $1,000 plus for your title insurance policy when you buy a house. And the reason that you wouldn't have to pay that is because you wouldn't need someone to go through all of those books and establish provenance, because the blockchain will do that for you in a way that, requires 2 or 3 clicks.
Yeah, no, when we were buying our house, that was always kind of like one of those things where it's like, there's got to be a better way. And then when you're closing, you go to the title company, and they basically just kind of say, yeah, the people who own this house, and I understand, but at least with the idea of how blockchain could work would be, if you actually hold the digital asset version of that physical property, then there'd be no need for any kind of checking, because any transfers would just be, quick, within a second or two.
Yes.
Of looking back through the history of that transaction, whoever holds that. But one of the issues I thought about was like, what happens if, even with estate planning, right? And let's just say you have a digital title to that property.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a public blockchain, and let's say somehow someone was able to get the private keys and steal that digitized version of the title of your property.
Yep.
And they now have that, but it's technically legally left to, let's just say, my children. They're living on the property. Like, how does that work? Or would that have to be something more we'd be talking about, some sort of private blockchains, or some sort of like Ethereum type of deal where, you could keep, that's one of the things where I'm trying to figure out how that would work in terms of theft of those digital assets.
Well, I haven't given this exact question a ton of thought, but a couple of things that you could do using Bitcoin, for example, you could create a multi-signature where you needed, more than one signature in order to transfer. And that's a nice dilution of power, right? So that you can dilute the single key power, so that if your computer gets hacked, you're not immediately losing title. You can also create a time delay. You can lock transactions using time lock. You can also create all sorts of advanced transactions that have layered signatures. So you could say, okay, well, my family needs 2 of these 3 to come together to transfer, but you could, after a year, my lawyer and my spouse could come together themselves and transfer it, or after X period of time. So you can actually create all sorts of scripting conditions. You can encumber these transactions in lots of different ways. And we haven't seen any of that play out in any meaningful way in any wallets yet, but I think we will, and I think we will soon. So the sort of locking the title, for example, you could easily lock the title for a year, but you could unlock it if X, Y, and Z happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
And so that's one way to do it on an open public blockchain. I think that you have the same issue with a private blockchain where, if someone gets hacked, they can move things. The only difference is that with a private blockchain, the powers that be can undo the transaction, right? And I kind of feel like, well, why do we need to, we already have that system, right? We don't
Yeah, it's just kind of digitizing what we
Yeah.
already have. It's not really that much
Yeah.
of a
And
leap.
like, okay, that's fine, I guess. But why do something halfway when you can totally change things in a substantive way that solves a lot of the problems of the existing system? So one of the really quickly, I know we're running out of time, but one
No rush at all.
one of the I grew up in the Detroit area and I went to law school in Michigan. And one of the problems that this technology can solve with real estate is that there's a lag between the closing and the recording in the official documents, right? So when you closed on your house, you had a paper deed. And what happened afterwards is someone, probably not you, went down to the county clerk or whomever the recorder of deeds is and gave them a piece of paper. And when they got that piece of paper, they stamped it received, and then they put it in an inbox. And then whoever is supposed to go into those musty books, they are supposed to go and then physically record the information from the deed into the books. You with me?
Yep.
Okay. So during the financial crisis in Detroit, what happened was the recorder of deeds, I believe, was so understaffed that they got about 3 months behind. So their inbox was filled with 3 months worth of deeds. What that meant is that people were selling their houses. People took advantage of this delay. People were selling their houses 2, 3, and 4 times to different buyers because it takes about, 30 days to 30 to 45 days to close in most jurisdictions. But the recorder of deeds was 3 months behind. So they would have a closing on Monday for their house. Then they would have a closing on Wednesday with a different bank and a different buyer. Then they would have a closing on Friday with a different bank and a different buyer. And so they were effectively selling the same property 3 times because of the lag. So in the inbox, there were 3 different deeds, but when the title company did the search in the records and the actual books, it still showed the original owner owned the property.
Wow.
Yeah. And so people were, banks lost a ton of money. People lost a ton of money. People who had already sold their homes and thought that they had closed on a house found out that, guess what? You're not the real owner because there was a lag in recording. And so what this technology does, by taking the transaction and combining the transaction itself with the recording on the ledger, you eliminate that lag time. So you eliminate that from happening totally by using this technology.
And there's
I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and there won't be the 30-day delay or whatever. It would be the not necessarily instantaneous, but depending on the blockchain that you were building this on, in the case of like Bitcoin, within 10 minutes there wouldn't be. And so I guess the way to avoid having a house sold to you that person no longer owns or whatever, you just have to look at your watch for 10 minutes and go, okay, now we know that you didn't just sell this 10 minutes, in between while we were talking or something. And it's a really, really cool application.
Realistically, the closing is going to take longer than an hour anyway, right? So if you're selling a house, you'd probably want, if you're using Bitcoin, you probably want to wait an hour, maybe even 2. So you can, do the transaction, make sure everything is good, put a couple hour delay on it and call it a day. You can see it in the mempool and make sure that it's good to go. And then effectively, once it's confirmed, wait 6, 8, 10 confirmations, and then you don't have to worry about it.
That would actually be pretty exciting to at closing. Just be scanning somebody's QR code on their phone or whatever for payment transfer for the house.
Right? I mean, that would be great.
Yeah, no, it's any elimination of friction in a system usually leads to savings for the people participating in it, which is always good for everybody. Not necessarily always, but the more friction you can eliminate, the better.
Well, yeah, and arguably for people who don't understand the process, most people don't buy tons of houses, right? So the repeat players are the ones who can take advantage of all of the little anomalies, all the quirks of the system. So I like closing those sorts of loopholes. I think that, it makes outcomes for everyday people better when we can close those sorts of loopholes.
And that's what, is exciting about this space, and not that blockchain has an application for everything under the sun that's been proposed, but I think that it has some real applications that have some real, I shouldn't say real world, but real world effects that will be net positive on society. And that's, really, really what excites me about this space is kind of just the discovery process of where does this fit? Where does this not fit? And then, where do we go from here?
Yeah, me too. Me too. Couldn't agree more.
But I wanted to thank you for being, with us today. It was really wonderful to talk. Like I said a couple of times, I was like, I hadn't thought of this or thought of that. And I know that myself and the listeners have learned a lot. And I'll have the links to all your sites, to your social media, as well as a link to your book, which everyone involved in crypto should head over and buy. And so what's the best way to get a hold of you if someone's, trying to contact you with a question?
You can reach me on Twitter at Pamela JD, PAMELAW JD. Or you can reach me on my website at empoweredlaw.com. There's a contact form. It's easy to reach me. I'm happy to help. So definitely do reach out. And one thing I want to say, my book is available in ebook and print. If you buy the print, you get the ebook for free. And if you like audiobooks, I'm thrilled to tell everyone that it's not me who's reading the book, but it is Stephanie Murphy from Let's Talk Bitcoin. And I don't know if you're familiar with Stephanie's voice.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Oh, she's like, her voice is velvet. She's a professional voice actress, and it is fantastic. So if you like audiobooks, I'm super honored that Stephanie agreed to do the audiobook. And so that's what you'll find. You can also see samples and listen to samples of the work for free on Amazon. And again, you can find the crypto asset inventory and your letter to loved ones templates on my website at Empowered Law.
Well, perfect. Thanks again for coming on and letting everyone know.
Thanks.